Okay. Um, okay. So tonight we're gonna talk about one of the probably the most exciting missions that I can think of uh, is the combined mission with NASA and SpaceX to actually put the first humans on Mars. Um, it is amazing to think that in just the next 6 years, if all goes well, that we're going to have our first footprints on Mars, and think of the excitement of stepping out of the spacecraft and looking at an image somewhat similar to this, which was taken by Curiosity. This was one of Curiosity's first postcards of the Martian landscape. I don't know about you, Gene, but this kind of reminds me a lot of Arizona. In fact, it might have been taken in Arizona. Who knows? But so this is a pretty spectacular time for us right now, and the progress that I'm going to be talking about, and the development of the vehicle that's going to get us there, and that is the SpaceX Starship. Going to be talking mainly about the Starship itself. Just some terminology here. Sometimes the booster, which is usually referred to as the Super Heavy booster, and the Starship, when they're together as just the Starship, and then sometimes you'll see them referred to separately. I will be dealing with them tonight on a separate basis. We're going to talk just a little bit about the booster, but mainly we're going to be talking about literally our ride to the Martian surface. And there's some pretty interesting things in doing the research for this talk, pulling this all together. I certainly learned a lot, and it's there's some really eye-opening things that I'm going to be talking about later that make this even more of an exciting mission from a human aspect. Boy, the Starship is certainly at the top of the food chain. This is an interesting slide. We do a lot of comparisons to the Saturn V, and of course the SLS is the NASA development project going on as well. But it's amazing. We're talking about one humongous vehicle that stands 118 meters tall. And I don't know if you all remember about a year ago when the Falcon Heavy first went up. Boy, I just thought that was spectacular. But we're in for quite a show with the Starship and the Super Heavy booster. So just a few words, and again, I'm going to be using some comparisons to what we're familiar with now. SpaceX is pretty much has launches almost every couple weeks. They're responsible for the first manned mission, that occurred since the end of the space shuttle program. And so due to their really advanced methodologies and progress, I really think this whole Starship and this Mars mission is going to be a real reality. But in comparison, this beast is 223 feet tall and 30 feet in diameter. And some of the numbers are just, really overwhelming. I'm going to use the term propellant tonight, and that's going to be the combination of the fuel and the oxidizer. And in this particular case, these engines use methane and oxygen. The oxygen is the oxidizer. But this booster actually holds 3,300 tons of propellant, and basically produces about 16 million pounds of thrust. And in comparison, we used to think the Saturn V was a real powerhouse, and it was, but that was only 7.6 million pounds of thrust. So literally, the Super Heavy is about twice the thrust. They can mount up to 37 Raptor engines, and we'll talk about these engines in a little bit more detail in a minute. I think the first go around, there's only going to be like 21 or 27 engines, but they can go all the way up to 37 engines. I just added this question mark today because some of the original designs showed that the Super Heavy would come back, which it will, to a landing pad. But Elon, within the last month, has made a new proposal on how to retrieve the Super Heavy booster. And I won't, I'm just going to leave that as a little bit of a surprise a little bit later. But it involves getting rid of the legs. It'll be a legless landing. But that I even have a little animation for. So, what's interesting is, the booster, and you will also see in the Starship itself, it's all about propellant. I mean, usually payload and propellant ratios are like 95 to 5. And in this particular case, you will see that the LOX tank, or the liquid oxygen tank, is the dominant tank, and the methane is the smaller tank. Now, what's nice about this type of propellant is that the ratio is like 78 to 22. So you would think that the LOX tank would be to that proportion. But then once you take into the fact that what the densities are, the density of LOX is about twice that of methane. And so when you do the scaling, it really only turns out to be about a 60-45 ratio instead of the 78 22. But we're literally talking about all mega tons of propellant. Actually 3,300 tons of propellant. So not a lot to say about the Super Heavy, other than the fact that it's going to get this Starship into approaching low Earth orbit. It will still take the engines of the Starship to complete the rest of the way into low Earth orbit. But the Starship itself stands 160 feet tall. Again, it's 30 feet in diameter, and it only carries a mere 1,200 tons of propellant, and about 100 tons of low Earth orbit payload. So there's that ratio where you're basically, like always, sitting on 10 times as much propellant as you have payload. I just love this picture by Dale Rutherford. He's a graphic artist, and he put this together just to kind of get us some idea of the comparisons here. Of course, this is the space shuttle. Space shuttle really was maxed out. A typical crew was like 5 or 6 members. It could handle up to 8 astronauts. This is the Crew Dragon, the current spacecraft from SpaceX that's taking crews up to the International Space Station. It can handle 6 crew members. So interesting enough, the crew capacity is about the same with the Space Dragon, with the Crew Dragon as the Space Shuttle. Of course, here's Elon right here. You can't see his face, but that's him. And then this is his Cybertruck, again, for comparison. But then here's the space, the Starship, which can hold up to 100 crew members in one configuration. So just an amazing comparison. Feel free to jump in and ask questions. I mean, we don't need to save everything to the end. So if there's a comment or a ooh or an ah, or just something that I said was silly or you didn't understand, just please jump in and just let me know. So a lot of us, in the news, you kind of only hear about the Starship development, the crew version. But really, the Starship is really a whole family of starships. So the crew version is what's going to take us, the crew, to Mars. But as you probably have heard in the news, another revenue generator for SpaceX and Elon is going to be point-to-point missions. Or actually, it's not a mission. These are point-to-point 30-minute rides to literally any place on the globe in 30 minutes. So Starship will actually be used as a hopper to go to from the U.S. to Singapore in 30 minutes. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. One of the ways that we're going to be able to get Starship to Mars is by refueling in low Earth orbit. And so there's going to be a tanker version of Starship, which is going to be all fuel. There's a cargo version for launching and putting into orbit 100-ton satellites and maybe big pieces of a new space station or some maybe a collection of 10 or 20 different satellites. And then, of course, NASA did select SpaceX to actually be one of the competitors for a lunar landing vehicle. As you can see here, this is dedicated for the moon environment. The landing thrusters are actually way above the center line of the Starship, not to kick up too much of the lunar dust as this big beast lands. And again, this can bring literally 100 tons of cargo and or astronauts and their equipment to the moon. And then this is a new concept, and it's called the Deep Space Starship. And this is basically not going to be a returnable. This is a kind of a one-way ship that designed to take a huge spacecraft or rovers out to the outer planets. Okay. So if you peel back the skin and look inside, it is interesting. There are the two. There's the main LOX tank and the methane tank. But one of the interesting things that you kind of forget about is once you get into low Earth orbit and you have to do that second burn to get appropriate orbit, you have to keep these. Most of the fuel is going to be spent in injecting this beast into orbit. And so one of the things that they've had to do is to keep these tanks pressurized. And so they actually have these repressurization lines, basically. So some of the and we'll get some more details of the engines, but some of the propellants are actually fed back to pressurize, keep the tanks pressurized, so that the fuel will flow smoothly to these Raptor engines. Then this is, I thought was really cool. There are two tanks. They're called header tanks, one for the LOX and one for the methane. These are essentially not reserve tanks, but these tanks are dedicated to just the landing of the Starship. And so if you expend all the fuel in your main tanks, you still want to land, right? And so these header tanks basically are the reserves that are dedicated strictly for landing, which is certainly a good thing. And we'll actually, I don't know how closely you folks follow the news. I've got a short video clip of the first flight of the Starship, and you will see in vivid detail that it was this methane tank, this header tank, which was assumed to have enough pressure in it, but it turns out that it did not. So there was kind of dramatic results for the landing. And I'll show you that in a little bit. Two different kinds of engines on the Raptor. This was a steep learning curve for me. I'm not a fluid dynamics person by any shape or form, but there is a dramatic difference in the structure of the engines. In order for the engines, the same component, the same engine base, or the heart of the engines are the same, but the nozzles are dramatically different, and they are geared for whether this engine is going to be working in the vacuum of space or within the atmosphere. And so this little rocket tidbit here, and this is something that I learned just the other day, is that a rocket engine's nozzle is specifically designed that the exhaust air is expanded to be equal in pressure with the ambient pressure. This is when maximum efficiency is created. And so at sea level, or in our atmosphere, at this plane, at the edge of the nozzle, you're trying to expand the gas proportionally so that when the exhaust is at the end of this nozzle, it is equal to the ambient pressure. Well, in the vacuum of space, there is no ambient pressure, right? And so theoretically, you'd want to make this nozzle infinitely large, but that can't happen. So they basically make this nozzle as big as possible in order to get the pressure at the plane of the exit nozzle to be as low as possible, so that the efficiency of the engine is as high as possible. And you can see by comparison. So when the Starship actually is boosted up into low Earth orbit, and to achieve the final orbit, it will be these large vacuum engines that will be firing, and these sea level engines actually won't get used until the Starship actually either lands back on Earth or lands on Mars. So what's kind of a little nerve-wracking, one of the first nerve-wracking things that I kind of felt in putting this together, is that on our trip to Mars in a Starship, you're going to have 3 engines that will basically be unused for 6 months. And the first time they're going to be used is in the landing process on Mars. Okay, that'll be the first time that they'll actually fire. So just think about that for 6 months. Okay. One of the things that SpaceX has done is really revolutionized the design. They have produced, this will be the first methane LOX engine to actually, go into low Earth orbit. Typically, these rocket engines are running on a kind of refined kerosene, this RP1 fuel, and their efficiency isn't all that great. I mean, they're good rocket engines, and you'll hear the term that the pre-burners are ignited. And essentially what that means is that you want to pump this fuel at high pressure from the fuel and the oxidizer into the combustion chamber, and you go through these pumps. And so the way the older design worked is you actually robbed some of this fuel, did a pre-burn, and got this pump spinning. And but then drive the pumps from the oxidizer and the fuel into the combustion chamber. This was pretty inefficient from the standpoint that all of this was just wasted fuel. And you will see in a lot of these launches, where literally you'll see this, this third stream that is actually just wasting fuel from this pre-burner oxidizer pump. But for the Merlin engine, they basically have a closed system. They do dual pumps, and they literally just have these crossovers, and so none of the fuel is actually wasted. And this turns out to be a far more efficient engine. So on the Falcon 9, which is their current launch vehicle, from one of these engines, they get about 845 kilonewtons of thrust. On the Starship Raptor, these things are hitting 2 million newtons of thrust per Raptor. Again, what SpaceX is doing is now RP1 is typically cooled a little bit, to maybe 14 degrees Fahrenheit. But liquid oxygen can be cooled all the way down to, minus 207 degrees C. And methane's operating temperature is around minus 180 degrees C. So the reason they do this is again, it's all about, trying to get as much fuel in these spacecraft as possible. And by supercooling these propellants, it actually increases the density, so we can get actually more fuel, for the space allotted. So again, if you haven't been following this, this is just, I've been following this clearly for the last year. And I've seen all these pieces and parts come together. But down in Boca Chica, Texas, which is the very southernmost southeastern point of Texas, is a little town called Boca Chica, which no longer exists because Elon bought it and built this spaceport. And so literally building by building has been coming together. This is the newest construction. This is where that 230-foot super heavy booster is going to be built. Right now they're using it to assemble starships. And the progress has just been amazing. So they have a low bay where they build the nose cones, a mid bay where they build the tank sections, and then they're doing the final assembly in the high bay. And so this high bay is going to switch off between final assembly of starships and booster assembly. So, and again, if you're not into the news, it's amazing when you peel the onion back of how much work is going on make this happen. You know, Elon basically has said that he wants to start an assembly line, literally an assembly line of these starships, and he's already built you know, there was a serial number 8, which did its maiden voyage and gave us just a ton of feedback about, you know, about all the maneuvers and the engine performances and any flaws in the design. And it actually uncovered one major flaw on the landing of the Starship. And I'll talk about that in a second. But we're talking mass production here. I mean, literally, they've got 2 more Starships waiting in the wings. This one is undergoing static fire and cryogenic testing. It's actually been static fired 4 times. And I was actually hoping to have a video, but on the last series of static fires, they had some damage to one of the Raptor engines, and in the process of replacing that engine. But next week there should be a second flight of a Starship, and so, but 10 is ready. 10 is getting ready to go, and 11 and 12. These white lines mean that it hasn't been stacked yet, but everything that's in between these heavy white lines has been built, and so there's pieces and parts as they're going on, and most of the super heavy is actually ready for final stacking. So a real assembly line literally going on of Starships that are going to go to Mars and to the moon. So switching gears a little bit away from the hardware, you know, Elon basically has this multiplanetary, you know, essentials concept. He's always been about rapid and complete, you know, rocket reuse. Not only the booster, but, you know, in this particular case, this is essentially the second stage. So not only will the booster be reusable, but certainly the second stage in the Starship is going to be reusable. He by far is just blowing NASA away with the cost of the launches and the use of very low cost propellants. And I've got some price comparisons coming up here. But this combination of methane and LOX is a real inexpensive, low cost propellants. He is also, you know, planning on orbital refilling. So having gas stations up in low Earth orbit, so that once a Starship launches, it can top off the tanks, so to speak, so that we have full tanks before we head off to Mars. And then this is a big one. Once we get to Mars, we would like to return. And so one of the biggest decisions in going with methane and LOX is the fact that those propellants can actually be manufactured on Mars itself. And so one of the early missions to Mars will be actually what's called an ISRU, an in situ resource utilization. It's essentially a propellant manufacturing, robotic propellant manufacturing system that will actually make the fuel for the return flight. Truly amazing. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that Elon just within weeks decided to get rid of the landing legs on the main super heavy booster, and he has come up with this concept of literally snatching the booster out of the air as it lands. And so I've got a little. So Nick Henning here made a little animation of Elon's you know, recent idea, and unfortunately I couldn't get the animation, the video to play in in PowerPoint. So if you can just bear with me for a second, I just need to play this from my desktop, and you can still see my desktop, right? Okay. Oh, come on. This is filling of the tanks, the cryogenic fuel.
Then I think this is that landing back on Earth or on Mars or both. Dennis, I missed what you had said. Is that landing where it catches it in the air? Is that just when it comes back to Earth, or is that also the method for landing on Mars?
Oh, okay. No, remember, this is only for, remember, the boosters are only going to get the starships into low Earth orbit.
Okay.
And the starships will land themselves on Mars.
Got
so,
it.
Yeah. So the only thing going, no, this is just this is just like hot off the press. This is like 2 weeks old, and this new idea is just going through the community like wildfire. Literally snatching the booster just before it lands. And now the goal here is, you saw that whole sequence. Literally, Elon says that his goal is to turn around a launch in 2 hours. From the time the booster lands, it'll get another Starship put on top of it, refueled, and then relaunched. Okay, it just, the man, God, if the man started a religion, I would join it. It's just amazing. I just love the way he thinks. So this is all part of his schema of rapid and complete rocket, reuse. The other thing is, in the selection of the propellants, again, the real amazing, the cost at the pump per gallon for RP1 is actually pretty good. It's about $4.18, but methane is only $2.92. But the big thing is the fuel ratio. The LOX to RP1 is 2.7, and so you're using a lot more RP1. And so with a 3.7 LOX to fuel ratio, basically, and LOX is the common denominator and is very, very cheap. But it's the actual fuel itself, either the RP1 or methane. And then the other thing about this LOX methane is and I'm not going to go into all the technical details, but there's something called the specific impulse of an engine. And it's just taking about 1 kilogram of fuel through a given nozzle size and how long it takes to burn that fuel. So it's kind of a miles per gallon thing. It's an efficiency. And the current Falcon RP1 fuel has an efficiency of about 370 seconds, and methane is 459 seconds. So just a tremendous difference in the cost of the fuel. And of course, as you see, is in his family of starships, he is basically going to make a tanker, a starship, basically, which is a regular starship with an additional 100 and an additional 100 tons of fuel in it. Now, I think this is, for all you chemists out there, this is really very cool. I mean, being able to target Mars and knowing what the resources are on Mars, and of course that keeps changing as we discover subterranean water on Mars, and of course we have found sufficient water under the dry ice on the polar caps of Mars. But what Elon took into consideration here is there is virtually an unlimited supply of carbon dioxide, which is the entire atmosphere of Mars, mainly, and the water that we've recently have found on Mars. So there's about 5 million cubic kilometers of ice at the poles and underwater reservoirs that we have found. Plus, Mars's atmosphere is 90% carbon dioxide, which turns out, even though it's only 1% of our atmosphere, turns out to be about 25 trillion metric tons of carbon dioxide. And so basically, by just through electrolysis, we can get water into H2 into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen component, can be liquefied, and that's our oxidizer. That's our LOX. The hydrogen then is combined with CO2 to form water, which will be nice drinking water, very pure, and methane. And so then the methane will be, liquefied and cooled and stored. So really, we have all the ability, and good thing, because once the Starship gets to Mars, it's going to be completely out of fuel. And so it's going to rely on this process here and robotic in situ stations to generate the fuel for the astronauts to come back. And that I don't know, that makes me a bit nervous, but it's really kind of a cool concept. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you now. It seems like this will end in somewhat of a disaster if you've been watching the news, but unfortunately the media kind of focused at the end of this video. But what I want to point out before I play this is that this first Starship flight, this is the maiden voyage of a first Starship, basically accomplished about 90% of its mission goals. In the takeoff, maneuvering, you will see that a very important, essential component in landing a Starship is what's called a belly flop. And so this Starship's going to come back into the atmosphere like a skydiver, and then at the last minute turn around and do a propulsive landing. And so this first maiden flight did all of that. And unfortunately, there was a failure in one of those header tanks. That methane tank wasn't properly pressurized. And they've already fixed that problem. And next week, we're going to have another flight of Starship number 9. But this was produced in 4K by SpaceX just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it's really the best I've seen. So here we go. Those are those sea-level engines. So as the Starship gets lighter, they have to shut off the engines so they don't go too high. Now it's going into its skydiver position, which is just so cool. Now they lost an engine. Oh, I could watch that video 10 times a day. All right, so okay, so if that's not nerve-wracking enough, so here's the whole transportation architecture of getting ourselves to Mars. So we have the initial launch of Starship just below low Earth orbit. And the return of the booster. Now, once the Starship has to act as a second stage to actually get it into a secure low Earth orbit, it has used up a significant amount of its fuel, and so. There's certainly not enough fuel to do the injection burn into the Mars trajectory. So it's going to actually take 4 tankers. So it's going to actually meet up with 4 tankers, and of course these tankers will take off on boosters again, but they'll be fully loaded with fuel. They will go tail to tail and refuel the Starship that is going to literally head to Mars. Now this is going to be cool. This is what I found just really remarkable. So once this guy is fully fueled and ready to go, it's going to take about a 9-minute burn to put it into a trans-Mars injection. And it's going to use up over 80% of its fuel to do that. So, and then of course it will be coasting for 6 months on its way to Mars, but it does not have enough fuel to orbit Mars. Doesn't have enough fuel to slow down and go into an orbit. So this is a one-shot only deal. So on its way to Mars, it has to go straight in. There is no orbiting and no planning like when a Crew Dragon or something leaves the space station, they wait and then they orbit a couple times and then they find the ideal landing spot. None of that can happen because they have no fuel. They only have enough fuel to land. So once they get to Mars, it's that belly flop maneuver straight into the atmosphere. And then finally the landing. And then the only way that they're going to get back is with this ISRU unit, where they're going to manufacture the methane and the oxygen, refuel the Starship. It's going to take off. Now, luckily, the gravity of Mars is only 38% of that of Earth, so we won't need a booster to get this puppy going back to Earth. But again, with its injection burn to get back to Earth, it only will have fuel to land. And it will not have enough fuel to slow down and get refueled to do any kind of other kind of, more graceful, or not graceful, but, more time independent landing. And so the same thing's coming back. It's going to come into Earth's atmosphere with that belly flop maneuver that you saw with serial number 8, and then land on Earth. Just, when you think about this whole thing, how this all has to happen, you gotta wonder how much guts these astronauts will have that are going to go on this first mission. Okay. Any questions about this? This is just amazing. Yeah, Mitz.
Dennis, so looking at when it's coming back to land and it's doing that belly flop and before the flip, does that orientation in space require any special heat shielding?
Oh yeah. So the belly flop itself, remember the serial number 8 only went up to like 50,000 feet, or it was 12 kilometers or something. And but no, in coming back to Earth, and also the only way that we're going to slow this rocket down is on the belly of the Starship will be heat tiles. And so, yeah, it's going to get just like the heat shields.
It just seemed, because of that orientation, I wondered if it required even more heat shielding than what we normally have seen in space orbiters.
I can't answer more or less. All I know is that it's going to come in at at the angle such that those shields, just like the reentry shield on the Crew Dragon, is going to be plasma hot. I mean, it's literally so. That's the other scary thing. This thing is there's no parachutes to slow it down. It's going to come in and slam into the atmosphere belly first and use its belly as a heat shield and to slow down. And then at the last minute, you see that flip maneuver to make a propulsive landing. Yeah, gosh, don't sign me up for this one. Okay, so I'm going to, last 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to talk about, the actual colonization. What are we ideally going to have to face once we get to Mars? It's always very attractive to talking about getting to Mars, but what's actually left out in a lot of these discussions, and I'm going to show you a different picture. These are some of the earlier, artist conceptions of what it may look like to have a Mars colony. Well, more than likely, it's not going to look like this at all for a lot of reasons that I'm going to bring up here shortly. So this is interesting. I pulled this out. This was one of Elon's original timelines that he put together back in 2016. About all the progress and out of since 2016 to right here 2021, he's only been about a year off in his planning and where we're at. We haven't started any booster testing. We're actually supposed to be starting, and the booster is just finally just being built at this point. We certainly haven't done any orbital testing, but Elon is promising that Starship will actually be in orbit before the end of 2021. Wow, just think about that, having a Starship in orbit. And then in his original projections, he talked about, you know, the first crew, not crew, but cargo mission to Mars. He plans on sending cargo first. And that certainly has been delayed till 2024. Okay. Oh, by the way, these little bubbles here. Remember, we just can't willy-nilly go to Mars anytime we want to. The window and all of the orbital mechanics works out such that we can only, you know, and that's why there was this as Lee mentioned, 3 different missions to Mars that went off in July of 2020. 2020 was one of those windows. So it's every 26 months we can go to Mars, and so so that this window here was supposed to be the unmanned mission, and that has actually been delayed until the end of 2024. And then the first manned mission, first feet on the Mars, basically will be in early 2027. Okay, amazing, the planning and him being within. Now you take any of the NASA programs, and by comparison, being off by just a year at after this much time is just amazing progress. Okay, so in the last few minutes, since I have more of a medical background than a rocket scientist background, it always compels me to talk about the health issues, and there are really very significant health issues that we're going to have to address in going to Mars. We got 2 pieces. We got the journey to Mars. Got to remember, the farthest we've ever been is the moon, right? Humans. And that was like 3 or 4 days. Getting up there, we spent 2 or 3 days on the moon, a couple days back, piece of cake, 250,000 miles away. Here, we're going to be actually leaving the Earth's magnetosphere and traveling in, interplanetary space for 6 months. We're going to be exposed to solar winds, where we're no longer going to be like in the ISS. The ISS is really, right next door. It's only 200 miles above the surface of the Earth, right? And so it's well within the magnetosphere. And so all the, a lot of the solar winds and cosmic rays are being blocked. Now we still have to be aware of, really super large storms where the astronauts in the ISS have to take protection. But now we're going to be 6 months in traveling totally unprotected. So we really have to be aware of shielding issues and exposure to the solar winds, and what's worse is our cosmic rays, and not to mention micrometeors that are traveling like bullets. So couple that, all the radiation issues, but now we're talking about microgravity for 6 months. Now, luckily, we've got experience with that on the ISS, and a lot of the missions are 6 months long. And I've got just a couple of slides that show you that is not usually all that public about all of the medical issues that our astronauts have after 6 months in microgravity. Okay. Now, I hate to use the term microgravity. The astronauts on the ISS are not in microgravity. They're weightless, okay? In fact, the gravity pull on them is pretty much about the same. It's only a couple percentage lighter than if they were on the surface of the Earth. Remember, the astronauts are traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, and they're continuously falling, right? So they have no force underneath them. So they are weightless. They are not in microgravity. Okay, big distinction. On our trip to Mars, we will actually be in microgravity as that 1/r², that r gets bigger and bigger. Yes, the gravity will drop off significantly. But so we got 6 months of microgravity. But now once we're on Mars, Mars has no magnetosphere. So all that radiation that they were exposed to in the trip over basically will follow them down to the surface of the planet. Okay. So that same solar winds, cosmic rays are all going to be, in full force on the surface. The other big unknown is the gravity on Mars is only 38% that of Earth, right? We have no idea what effect that will have on our body. We have no data. Okay. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the atmosphere is 95% CO2. So breathing is going to be an issue, and spacesuits are required. So the atmosphere is toxic, and the soil is also very, very toxic as well, with a lot of perchlorates in the soil itself. All right, so a lot of this is not of just general public knowledge, but after 6 months in the ISS, our astronauts have numerous and very serious visual problems. Glaucoma, they have increased intraocular pressure, they have intracranial hypertension, they get swelling of their optic nerves, and they actually get folds in their choroidal. They get what's called the choroidal folds, which is the blood supply to the retina. 60% of our astronauts in the ISS basically lose their visual acuity, and their actual prescription of their glasses change. So those are just the visual issues. The other issue is our astronauts, boy, and I give them credit because I have a hard time doing 30 minutes 5 times a day, 5 times a week. But these guys and ladies exercise 2 hours a day, 7 days a week on treadmills and all kinds of other weight machines. And even after that, they typically lose about 13% of their muscle volume. The peak power of their muscles is down 32%, and their force velocity is down 20 to 29%. I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures of the astronauts coming back from the Soyuz or from the SpaceX. They initially cannot walk. Okay, they cannot stand for a lot of reasons. Not only, the 2 astronauts that did the Crew Dragon, they were only gone for less than a week. But after 6 months, you will see these astronauts being carried away from the Soyuz on stretchers into medical tents. They can't walk. All right. Then, of course, there are bone problems. They lose 10% of their bone mass in 6 months. That's just 6 months. Now, remember, I'll mention this a little bit later. Before they can come back from Mars, the optimal return time is 18 months. So not only do they, have to live in that environment, but they have to live in it for 18 months before they can return home. And with this bone loss, it typically takes about 3 to 4 years to recover that bone loss. And where does the calcium from the bone go? It goes into kidney stones. So these astronauts have kidney stones, which is, if anybody has had kidney stones, knows that can be very painful. So this is just, you know, getting to Mars is going to be this. You're going to have these issues once you arrive. Okay. The other amazing thing is the heart changes its shape in 6 months because of the microgravity or the weightlessness. The heart goes from its typical triangular shape to almost perfectly round. And its efficiency, remember, the heart is a muscle, so you're losing some of that muscle mass in your heart. Not to mention they also suffer from, that's why they have a hard time standing, is when they do stand up, they have what's called hydrostatic hypotension. They basically stand up and pass out. You can't get the blood up to the brain. Okay, so if that isn't enough, we basically, now we can shield against radiation, some of the radiation, you know, like alpha and beta particles from the solar winds. But once we're outside that magnetosphere, we're going to need to have that shielding in order to block all these subatomic particles, which will actually tear through their DNA. Some of the particles will actually, you know, attack the bases. Some the links between the bases, and some the backbone of the DNA itself. And so this kind of damage to the DNA can certainly lead to cancer. Okay. Now we've got some real data on this. Interesting enough, it took Curiosity 253 days to get to Mars. That's about 2 months longer than what it should take the spaceship, Starship to take. But we kind of still get some background radiation that makes it through the magnetosphere and through our atmosphere. And you know, that background radiation, we have a unit called the sieverts. And that's just a unit that allows us to measure ionized radiation. And literally our background radiation for a whole year is literally 0.0004 sieverts. In the 8 months that Curiosity was traveling to Mars, it accumulated 0.33 sieverts. Now, to give you an idea of how much radiation that is, that's like getting a whole body CT scan every 10 days for 8 months. Definitely above the recommended medical usage. Okay. At that level, there's about a 2% increase in fatal cancer. Okay. All right. But like I mentioned, although those radiation issues are going to follow us right down to the surface of Mars. Mars's atmosphere is only 1% of the Earth's atmosphere, and it has no magnetosphere. And so, you know, we've been able to actually map out the annual radiation exposure on the surface of Mars. And in some of the lowest areas is the best, but it's still the annual radiation level is about 0.2 sieverts versus our 0.004 sieverts per year. So radiation, cosmic radiation, and solar winds are going to be a major issue that we're going to have to deal with once we get to the surface of Mars. So unlike those pretty glass domes that you saw in that first slide, more than likely we're going to have underground habitats or habitats that are built out of Martian material, soil, that will provide substantial isolation or shielding, you know, from the radiation. All right, so bottom line, in conclusion, we have no data. We've got 2 data points. We know that at gravity 1, what we're all experiencing tonight, is we're all perfectly healthy. We know that at 0 or microgravity, is extremely unhealthy, right? We have no idea. We have no data. We have no way of simulating any gravity. So we haven't put any probes in orbit with centrifuges or anything like that. So we have no data other than these two data points. And so if you, and somebody's just said nature never works that way. If you just assume that there's going to be kind of a linear relationship to health, between 0 and 1. But as somebody said earlier, but nature usually doesn't like straight lines. And so it's unlikely that at 0.38, but even if it was, Mars is not going to be a good place to live. It isn't going to be healthy unless we take, all these, well, in this particular case, we're talking about gravity. And so how do you make more gravity on Mars? Is some kind of rotating city. And nobody is talking about that. Nobody. And so what we don't know is, yeah, we can block the radiation and, we can hide, in caves and tunnels, but we can't escape the effects of gravity. And so we have been making assumptions that everything is going to be just okay, but we don't know that until we actually get there. And so it may turn out that 0.38 gravity is not much better than zero gravity, right? So it may be an extremely unhealthy place and a deterioration, a continue for especially for 18 months and not 6 months. The bone loss, the visual problems, the cardiovascular problems, all of those things may in fact be just as bad. And then it could be a little bit better. Now here is where we're assuming. We're assuming that it's not going to be that bad and we're going to be able to adapt. We have no idea that this is true. We have no empirical evidence of that. And then the super optimistic people are saying, God, we're all going to be super men and women, right? Because under 0.38 gravity, my heart doesn't have to work as hard. My joints are going to be better. I'm going to be able to do superhuman things, and we're all going to be superhumans. Okay, that's our most optimistic view. But we have no evidence for any of this other than this point and this point. So bottom line, we've got a lot of health issues to resolve before we can actually begin to think about joining poor Matt Damon, did he ever make it back? Yeah, I think he did, right? Yeah, okay. But before we can do what he did and live for 18 months on Mars, we're going to have to solve these health issues. Thank you very much. Thanks. Any questions or comments?
There's a lot of live cameras that you can watch SpaceX 24/7, getting ready for the next launch.
Yeah. I'm tuned into just about every one of them. How about you, Jeff?
What's the cost of this mission?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's interesting. You remember, this is all being privately funded. Not a dime of this is coming out of your pocket. Well, NASA has given some, launch money. But, it's interesting. I forget, it was the Russians were charging us millions of dollars per seat just to launch the astronauts to the ISS. And so NASA really hasn't put much money into SpaceX at all. This has all been privately funded so far, which is good news. Unlike the SLS, which is going to cost us billions of dollars out of your tax dollars.
Hey,
Yeah,
Dennis,
yeah.
the situation that you've made here about the trip to Mars is worse. I think it's worse than you're explaining here, because it's not just 6 months. It's 6 months there, 18 months to wait for the next window, and then 6 months more back.
Right, that's right. I left out 6 months.
Okay, and I don't know how much muscle mass or bone mass they're going to have left by the time they get back. So
Yeah.
it's actually worse.
Yeah, and nobody is really addressing this issue, and they're kind of hoping that at 38% gravity, but that's still going to be a problem once they get from 38% to 100% back on Earth. That's going to be a problem, even that difference.
Maybe 4 hours a day of exercise.
Yeah.
5 hours,
Yeah.
6 hours.
Hey, Dennis,
They'd probably die.
You haven't had the part of your ambassador training where you just don't talk about that part.
Yeah, I've been sworn to secrecy. Yeah, no, so there's this mission that I'm going to kind of focus on, and of course I've already done work with the Titan mission, so I'll be giving some talks on revamp that material on Titan, but the nice thing, and I'm finding out that on the initial orientation is literally I have all the same privileges and rights even though I'm a volunteer, but NASA ambassadors basically have access to all of the NASA and JPL facilities. And I can actually get into this SpaceX complex as a NASA ambassador, telling them I'm going to be doing a story on them. And so I just can't wait to get my vaccination, because I will be on the road to Boca Chica in a heartbeat.
Let us know when you get down there. We can watch for you on the cameras.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, Boca Chica Mary. I'll do a cameo for her. Yeah, she's recording almost 24/7 down there. Yeah.
Dennis, do you have any details on the ISRU? That
I'm
little
sorry?
box, the
What?
the ISRU, that little box that you drew, so that
Oh, yeah.
refueling.
Yeah. Well, other than basically it's actually not new technology. It's actually pretty old technology. I mean, this is the heart of the in the insight to resource utilization. It's basic two chemical processes that have been around forever.
No, I'm asking the technical aspect. So go forward two slides. Yes. So you drew that gray box. So what's that?
This ISRU?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is this robotic station, basically that will be fed water and taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and producing the methane and the oxygen.
So, but how can it deliver that?
Oh, that's going to be delivered, before the manned mission. There's going to be 3 or 4 starships just delivering cargo to Mars.
Hmm.
And this is actually going to be one of the cargoes. Got to remember, they have 18 months to that will actually be waiting for them, whether it'll be active or not. Somebody has to feed it. It's easy to get the atmosphere into it, this carbon dioxide, but somehow the water's got to be mined, and it's got to be fed water.
Mm-hmm. And energy.
And energy. Yep.
Yeah, the solar panels, I assume, are going to be the source of energy?
No, actually,
No?
there will be some, but it'll be mainly nuclear.
Okay.
Yeah, remember you're going to be like 50 million miles away, further away from the sun. So you only have about 2/3 of the solar energy as you would have.
Yeah, and not only that, but then you got dust storms. I mean, that's what crippled one of the early rovers, right? Was just dust accumulation on
Actually,
on the solar panels.
Yeah, actually, there's also another instance. I don't know about the one you talked about, but there's another instance in which the dust, like there was like a windstorm that actually blew off the dust that had accumulated on the solar panels, allowing one of the rovers to survive longer.
Yeah, I think that was Opportunity.
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they're going to use this. It's not. I shouldn't use that term nuclear because that scares people. Basically, what it is it's a radioactive heat source, and so it's a thermal generator, but it's driven by radioactive material.
Yeah, plutonium.
Plutonium. Yep. Yeah. So and that's what's driving Curiosity right now, and also the new rover. They learned their lessons of not relying on solar energy. Okay. All right, cool. Any other questions? Well, yeah, you guys think of anything, don't hesitate to email me, or you're trying to be polite or whatever, but don't. I love criticism, and so if you want to email me any suggestions or critiques, I'd be happy to receive them.
Dennis, Mike again. While you were talking, I noticed you were mixing what I felt were apples and oranges when you were talking about the weight of the stack in tons and the thrust in pounds. So I did some quick calculations of the thrust figures and went, oh, well, okay, it's going to have a G.5 as it lifts off because
wow. Okay, cool.
It doesn't have much more thrust than it weighs. So I was just thinking about that. And that's been something since the Mercury astronauts were flying on their rockets where they're reporting a thrust in pounds and weight in tons, and it's confusing.
Yeah,
or not as meaningful.
Yeah, then you throw in newtons.
Well, hey, I'm all for moving toward the metric system.
Right.
That weight will start to dissipate though as they use up the liquid oxygen and.
Oh yeah, very, very quickly. And in fact, that was one of the
ratio will start to increase a bit.
Yeah, that was
watch the telemetry that SpaceX puts on their screen during the launches and see the meters per second increasing quickly as it gets short on fuel.
Yep, and that's actually when they hit max Q, they've burned a lot of their fuel and they're really hauling butt at that point through the atmosphere.
Hey Dennis, you've got a lot of awesome graphics and information here. There's just a tremendous amount of information. If you were to Google this, you'd have endless. You can spend your entire life, reading up just on the progress they've had. Is there any, like in your preparation for this and your learning of this, is there any key resource that you would say, hey, if you're going to check something out or read this book or to point us to want to know more?
Yeah, actually, I have a couple sources that I pretty much check almost daily, and I tell you, certainly Tim Dodd, it's kind of a crazy name, but he is actually very, very good. He gives weekly updates. And he's really on top of what's going on with SpaceX. So he has his own YouTube channel, and so does Scott Manley. These two guys are really very good in and then there's another one. I didn't use any of his work in this talk, but there's another YouTube channel called What About It, AWI. And again, all of these folks do literally weekly or bi-weekly YouTube videos on the progress of SpaceX. And then of course there's live cameras running 24/7 of the again it's with this Boca Chica Mary on YouTube, and she's filming and doing everything 24/7.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate the opportunity to give this this work in progress, this very first talk, and
Our thanks should be to you. Thank you.
cool.
Outstanding presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah,
Good presentation, Dennis.
all right, I'm going to stop sharing here and